Oh, we've got a gathering tonight of the local pagan group for a talk, which I'm giving, on Greek mythology. So I've been reading around and deciding which Greek myths to talk about and so on. One of the myths, which I won't be talking about because it's, I've already decided and there's a full array of things to talk about. So this was an additional one, which I thought might be worth a few reflections and discussions on this channel. Is the story of the Styx, the River Styx. Now, the Styx is both the river itself, but also the goddess of the river. She is called Styx as well. So it's the sort of merging of the body of water with the divine being that animates that body of water, and it's quite a curious concept that the Greeks had of the river. Primarily, the Styx was visualised by most of the surviving writers, by which I mean the writers whose works have survived, not that the writer has survived. Where they talk about the River Styx as being underground, so it's mainly imagined, or was mainly visualised back in the day, as being the river that flows deep within the earth and encompasses the land of the dead, encompasses Hades, which is both the land itself, but also the god Hades is the sort of the being that contains the dead within himself. And the Styx is referred to as circling 9 times around the land of the dead, which in my mind makes it sound like it's a kind of spiral going round and round, but possibly that may not be how the actual ancient Greeks themselves visualised it. That may be just how my mind works. Now the element of oddity, at least for me at any rate, is that the word Styx, both the river name and the goddess name, means hated, the hated thing, the hated one. And one of the stories told about the River Styx is that back when the gods were at war with the Titans and everyone was the world was in turmoil as the mighty forces of the planet were clashing against each other and terrible things were happening, earthquakes and tidal waves and tornadoes and Lord knows what else were going on. Zeus called to those forces that were loyal to him, which was primarily the Olympians, but there were some titans like Hecate who were a force on the side of the Olympians rather than being on the side of the destructive powers of the titans themselves. So you sort of had a formation of 2 armies, 2 rival camps, and Zeus asks those who are loyal to him to swear an oath. And this oath is sworn on the waters of the River Styx. So Iris, the goddess of the rainbow, is sent down into the underworld to gather the waters of the River Styx. Now there's one account which talks about her gathering the waters in a golden basin or a golden bowl. Other accounts talk about the waters of the Styx being so sort of acidic and destructive that they burn away practically anything that they come into contact with the exception, very oddly, of a horse's hoof. And so there's talk about people gathering up the waters of the Styx, presumably a fairly small amount of water of the Styx, in the hoof of a horse, usually a female, a mare, rather than a stallion, and kind of cupping the water in this hollowed out hoof and carrying it up. But so there is the one account that talks about the gold basin. So whether it was a gold basin, whether it was a horse's hoof, pay your money and take your choice on that one. But the waters are gathered up, and Iris, who's a winged goddess, flies back up with her great rainbow wings back up to Olympus, and all of the forces, primarily the Olympian gods, but 1 or 2 others, gather around to swear an oath over the waters, which as an image obviously is quite a profound one, and could form certainly a part of Hellenic ritual being conducted today. If people wanted to swear an oath, they could swear it over a bowl of, well, it would have to be presumably fairly ordinary water that was symbolic of the waters of the River Styx. But this was seen, it's worth noting, as a really kind of heavy duty binding oath. These days, not so much in the ancient world, I don't think, but these days some people have become a bit casual about swearing oath. No end of court cases, you have people swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and then 3 minutes later they're lying through their back teeth about everything. So they clearly don't not everyone takes oaths terribly seriously. But if it was sworn over the waters of the Styx, then that was about as serious as you can get. And there are some rather colourful descriptions of what would happen to someone, including the gods themselves, not just mere mortals, but the gods themselves, if they forswore, that is to say, they made an oath and then broke it over the waters. And the gods, at least, would face this rather kind of horrible, sort of an exile, really, that would go on for about 10 years before they could rejoin the gods and were suitably purified of their oath breaking. If a mortal were to do it, I suspect it might be a bit more of a heavy duty consequence than 10 years of exile. But the fact, going back to the meaning of the name of hatred, the fact that they were swearing an oath, their most profound loyal oath over hatred, is a curious one. That leads me to sort of speculate as to quite why that should be. It could be that if you have sworn an oath to something and you are bound by that oath, and obviously oaths have consequences, and you find yourself having to do things, it's not just a kind of flippant few words you mutter and then forget about a minute later, but it's something that binds you, that shapes you, that makes you do certain things afterwards, or prevents you from doing certain things that you'd like to do afterwards, then you could, I can easily imagine, end up hating the oath you've sworn and thinking, oh, why did I swear this? Wish I hadn't sworn that oath. And so the oath that binds you to stick to your word, no matter how unpleasant the consequences become, could, in a sense, could become a hated oath, sort of a resented oath. So maybe there is an element of that. So is it that the waters were this seething, bubbling, poisonous morass of hatred, which is one of the images used in the kind of poetic descriptions of the water, say they're acidic, they're poisonous, they're murky and vile and awful, and some of the descriptions of the Styx make it sound like a really boggy, horrible marshland that's going around the realm of Hades, and you can imagine it full of leeches and horrible things. they make it sound quite rank. So is that why it is the river of hatred, the river of the hated one? The waters are just so vile and awful and poisonous and caustic that nobody likes them? Or is it the oath and its consequences that become hated, become resented, particularly by those who are maybe pressurised or are simply naive enough to rush into making an oath without thinking about the longer term consequences of it? Which reminds me a little bit of certain heathen practices in the ancient world and still today amongst modern heathens, where rather than the waters of a river, people would swear an oath over usually a drinking horn, but it could be any kind of a vessel really, filled with mead. So they'd have the horn up and they'd say, oh, I promise to do so and so thing, and take a swig of the mead and pass it on to the next person. And as you may well imagine, at a kind of big gatherings and feasts, that mead horn might go around quite a few times and people might get more and more sloshed as the evening went on. There would be one person who was sober, a bit like that drink driving campaign they had a few years ago about taking if you're out on the screaming piss of a weekend, you'd have a mate with you who was the sober one who would have to drive you all home, and also of course not just drive you home but keep an eye on you to make sure you didn't do anything stupid or I don't know, go off into a dark alleyway with someone you thought was stunningly lovely who would turn out to be a serial killer. So there would be the sober one to keep you safe. So there is an element of that in some of the old heathen and modern heathen rituals, that there is a sober person there, not to drive you home at the end of the day, but to take note. So there are almost like a kind of a secretarial role in amanuensis, who sits there saying, oh well, Fred oathed to do this and Mary oathed to do that, and they'd keep a record of what was oathed and who had oathed it, so that when everyone sobered up the next day, that person would go around and say, oh, did you remember last night you oathed to do so and so? And they'd be there to hold the person to account for their words, just in case the quantity of mead had led them to black out and forget what they'd oathed. And obviously the drunker you get, the more likely you are to start promising things that get sillier and sillier, and have consequences that, had you been sober at the time, you probably would have thought, maybe I won't oath to do that after all. So there is, in a sense, I think maybe an element there of a warning that you should be careful when making oaths, not to make them lightly, not to make them foolishly, because you could end up hating the fact that you are bound to do something that you maybe promised to do in a moment of rashness without thinking it through properly. So there may be an element of that going on. And there is one poetic line that refers to the Styx as the dread river of oath. So that kind of captures that element there. There's other mention of Styx as a goddess, more so than as the body of water, although the two are really one and the same thing, as being the daughter of Oceanus, the god of the ocean. And Tethys is also a sea deity, and she is given a tenth of their portion, well, a tenth of Oceanus's proportion, tenth of her father's body of water, which could be suggestive that the River Styx is maybe salty, if it is a tenth of the sea, which again, salt water is great to swim in, but you don't swallow it for obvious reasons, that it ends up having really horrendous effects on the person who swallows it if you swallow too much of it. So that could kind of go with this somewhat poisonous nature of the waters of the river. But she goes on by Pallas to have children, 4 children. Zelus, who is one of her sons, whose name means the zealous one, the zealot, which is telling. To some extent, you can look at the kind of family trees of the gods and think, well, they're just kind of shoehorning in names here and there. It doesn't necessarily mean very much. But I think on at least some occasions, probably actually all of them, but certainly some very obvious occasions, there is a definite link of why this being is the son or daughter of that being. It's not mere just kind of random names chucked together. Because zealotry, whether it's religious zealotry or political zealotry or any other kind of ideological zealotry, in theory, you could say a zealot has a great love of the thing they believe in, whether that's a political system, a religious system, or whatever. And it's their intense love of that thing that makes them so zealous for it. And hopefully, in a fair few occasions, that's true. But thinking of some of the zealous people I've met over the years, often zealotry goes hand in glove with hatred of anyone who doesn't share the passion for that religious belief, political ideology, whatever it may be. Maybe for some people, love takes a real back seat and hatred comes to the front. It's less and less about what they love and admire and believe in with a great passion, and it's more and more about who they hate and despise and want to destroy as an unbeliever, as someone who doesn't cleave to the one true politics or the one true religion or the one true whatever it may be. And so there is a definite link between hatred, Styx, and Zelos, zealotry. Nike is another one, the goddess of victory, which is an interesting. Is victory connected to hatred? Well, if it's victory in war, which mostly was how the ancients understood Nike when they called her the goddess of victory, it she wasn't quite so much the victory in the sporting contest or the victory at playing a board game or something like that, but primarily victory in battle. And if you go to war with someone, well, I suppose for a lot of soldiers, they're just told to go to war. They don't necessarily have any great understanding of the politics and motivations behind the war. They don't necessarily have any hatred or resentment of the enemy tribe until some general or politician or whoever it is says, right, get your weapons, we're marching off to war, heavily armed, and we're going to slaughter that bunch of buggers over there. But even if you didn't hate them 5 minutes ago, when the arrows are flying or the bullets are flying or the mustard gas is seeping through the trenches or whatever it may be, you probably do pretty quickly end up hating the enemy as you see people on your side, friends, loved ones dying, and as per the old adage that if we are going to hurt someone, we justify it through hatred. That you hate them because they are hurt. You've inflicted pain on them, and rather than admit you did it out of mindless obedience to a general, or you did it out of sheer spite and awfulness because you're a bit of a git, frankly, it's easier to say to yourself, well, they deserved to be hurt because they are a dreadful, terrible, awful person, and they got what they deserved. And so again, that kind of maybe hatred starts to come through with that kind of conflict, and so perhaps between Styx and Nike there is a bit of an echo, and she has various other children which maybe can be thought about on some other occasion. But yes, just a few thoughts on the nature of the river circling the land of the dead. Part of tradition has it that those either crossing the river, and there are kind of tributaries and subsidiary rivers coming off it, such as the Lethe, the waters of forgetfulness, that those who are dying drink from the waters of the Lethe and forget their past lives, forget where they've been, who they were, and they enter into the underworld as a forgetful shade. And those such as Pythagoras, who are believers in reincarnation, might well have suggested that if you are returning the other direction, so you're being reborn from the realm of the dead, you maybe have to drink the waters on the way out as well as on the way in, so that when you are reborn into a fresh body, you have little to no memory of your previous incarnations. Otherwise you would be just completely overwhelmed by the volume of lived experience. A small child who can remember 20, 30, 40 previous existences, that would be a bit overwhelming. So maybe you need to forget in order to start again. But the sense of crossing a river, of moving across a body of water in order to enter into what lies beyond, in this case the land of the dead, re-echoes in a lot of mythologies around the world as a theme. And in some cases, for example, a lot of European folklore, particularly Central and Eastern European folklore, there was a strong conviction that vampires could not cross running water. Stagnant water they can cross, but not running water. So the water forms a sort of a barrier. Partly maybe this is an element of memory of a lot of kind of early mapping, a lot of early cartography, where people would define their territories by obvious geographical features. So you can say, well, we own all of the land up to the edge of that mountain, or equally, we own all of the land up to where that river is, and on the other side of that river, that's somebody else's land, that's some other tribe, some other group of people. So the river becomes a natural kind of demarcation of where one thing ends and the next thing begins. So the crossing of the river, whether by bridge or by boat or by swimming across or whatever you're doing, is the leaving of one defined sphere and the entering into another defined sphere, another place. The waters of the Styx are also said, quite frequently said, to be very, very cold, very icy, which could have helped perhaps people kind of give a poetic explanation for why the corpse cools down and becomes icy cold after a while. Is the heat leaving the body. Well, obviously we have lots of medical scientific reasons for understanding that these days, but perhaps in earlier times the notion that that dead person had drunk the waters of the Styx and the coldness had seeped through them, and so their corpse had become icy cold. And I've known a few people who do sort of paranormal investigations and that sort of thing, who have suggested temperature drops. It's all quite frequently recorded that when spirits and what have you are entering into a place, people often report a drop in temperature. So maybe there is an echo of that going on there, of again the coldness of the waters of the Styx echoing this idea that certain phenomena are very, very cold. But anyway, that's just a few thoughts about the river and the idea of the oath being sworn on the waters of the river, and some of the underlying symbolism and meaning behind it. Be interesting to hear if anyone's got any additional thoughts they'd like to add, or maybe there's things I've said you disagree with and think, well, no, you've got the wrong end of the stick, it actually means such and such a thing instead.